Good morning, everyone. We're reading today from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 31, The Movements of the Living Entities. Thank you. And today's verse will be 35. And it's on page 746 for those who are following in the book. I'll read the translation. The infatuation and bondage which accrue to a man from attachment to any other object is not as complete as that resulting from attachment to a woman or to the fellowship of men who are fond of women. And the word for word, not, tata, in that manner, asya, of this man, bhavet, may arise. Moha, infatuation. Bandha, bondage. Cha, and anya prasangata, from attachment to any other object. Yoshit sangat, from attachment to women. Yatha, as pumsa, of a man. Yatha, as tatsangi, of men who are fond of women. Sangataha, from the fellowship. Na tatasya bhaven moho bandhaschanya prasangataha yoshit sangat yatha pumso yatha tatsangi sangataha. Na tatasya bhaven moho bandhaschanya prasangataha yoshit sangat yatha pumso yatha. Vaishnavis. Na tatasya bhaven moho bandhaschanya prasangataha yoshit sangat yatha pumso yatha sangi sangata. And the purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupāda. Is too much to ask for air? Yeah. Attachment to women is so contaminating that one becomes attached to the condition of material life, not only by the association of women, but by the contaminated association of persons who are too attached to them. There are many reasons for our conditional life in the material world, but the topmost of all such causes is the association of women, as will be confirmed in the following stanzas. In Kali Yuga, association with women is very strong. In every step of life, there is association with women. If a person goes to purchase something, the advertisements are full of pictures of women. The physiological attraction for women is very great, and therefore people are very slack in spiritual understanding. The Vedic civilization, being based on spiritual understanding, arranges association with women very cautiously. Out of the 4 social divisions, the members of the first order, namely brahmacharya, the third order, vanaprastha, and the fourth order, sannyasa, are strictly prohibited from female association. Only in one order, the householder, is there license to mix with women under restricted conditions. In other words, attraction for women's association is the cause of the material conditional life. And anyone interested in being freed from this conditional life must detach himself from the association of women. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Nina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rūpa Kadahmayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Yuta Padakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rūpam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadvatutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanditamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vansha Kolpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Nitai Namineche Namirhate Sharamlinam Dite Chere Nitai Namineche Namirhate Sharamlinam Dite Chere Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. For understanding the process of self-realization and any of the verses in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we must have context. In fact, for understanding anything, we require context. We can start from the Bhagavad Gita, which explains the way in which the material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. As in the 15th chapter, very beginning, Urdhva mulamada shakam ashvatam prahara avyayam chandamsi yasya parnani yasnam veda saveda vid adashchordvam prashutastasya shaka guna prabhida vishaya pravala adashcha mulan anusantatani karmanupanini manusha loke narupa masyeha tato palabhyate namto nachadir nachasam pratishta ashvatamenam sivaruda mulam asanga shastrena tridena chitva tatat padam tat parimargitabhyam yasmin katana nirvartanti bhuya tameva chadyam purusham prapadye yatak praviti prashita purani. This is Krishna's giving us the 360-degree view of reality. And the Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, begins by saying that it will present, its purpose is to present reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. 180 degrees, the equation of the spiritual world, which is described by Krishna throughout the Bhagavad Gita as a self-luminous, not tad bhase te suryona shashankhanda pavaka yat-gat-va-nirvartante tatama paramam mama. He says his abode is there in the spiritual world, and it's not like the dark material world, which is the shadow or the reflection of the spiritual world. And Krishna gives this metaphor in the Bhagavad Gita of a banyan tree. It has its roots upward and its branches down. And there's a way in which the spiritual world is reflected into the material world. And you get a topsy-turvydom. That means that which is up in the spiritual world is down in the material world. And Krishna is explaining also how it's entangling. It's very complicated. And from our perspective, na rupa masyeha tatopalavyate nanto na chandir nacha samprachishta, we can't understand how this tree originates, where it stands, nor can we see our place in it. And meanwhile, he says we're lost in this tree and we're entangled in it. So then he says that one must cut off one's attachment to the material world, chitva, by asanga, or disassociation with the material world in general. And then there are more details given through the Shastra, Brahma Samhita, verses 7 and 8, describe maya ramamanasya maya yoga viyogaha. There's a way in which, because of a need for a facility in which some living entities who are desirous of enjoying the material world, the Lord gives facility. As we know, the material world's manifested by the expansions of Kṛṣṇa. First there's Kṛṣṇa, then Baladev, and then the Chaturvyuha, and then Mula Shankarshan, and then the secondary Chaturvyuha. Then there's the Mahapurusha, who's the Karnadakshay Vishnu, and then Garbhadakshay Vishnu and Shiradakshay Vishnu, and then of course Shesha. And Mahavishnu, as the Brahma Samhita is describing in the verses I just alluded to, glances at the material nature. He has no connection with it, but he glances, and his glance becomes personified as Shambhu, who's Kṛṣṇa, but Kṛṣṇa in touch with the material nature. Shiram yat-pāda vikara vishesha yogat sanjayate nahitata pratigasti hetu na shambhutam apitata samupaiti karyat govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. The Sri Brahma Samhita, Brahma describes the position of Shambhu. He says there's milk and then there's yogurt. And really they're the same thing, only one has been touched by some acid that's made it coagulate. And similarly, Shambhu, who's a personification of the glance of Mahavishnu, enters into this world and takes the form of the lingam, the male generative organ. And then Rama, Devi, who accompanies, who is manifest also as a servant and comes to help manifest the material world, when in the material world takes the form of, although she's from the internal energy of the spiritual world, she manifests as the consort of Shambhu in the material world. So we have the yoni and the linga. Yoni means the female generative organ, and the male generative organ comes from the Lord Shiva. And we see this form of Shiva and the form of Durga, who are the representatives of the Lord in this world, who give facility for those souls who want to consort with the external energy. When Kṛṣṇa, in the form of Mahavishnu, glances at the material energy, he doesn't become entangled. But when an ordinary jiva glances at the material nature, Kṛṣṇa describes Jayato vishayam pumsam sangasteju vijayate sangat sanjayate kama krodho vijayate. that soul being tatastha, or highly influenceable, by glancing at the material nature, can become connected with it, or at least overcome by it, and or captured by the material nature, whereas Krishna is ajita. He's never captured by the material nature because it's his potency. And in the spiritual world, there's three major potencies called Hladini, Sandini, and Samvit. And these potencies are personified in the spiritual world. And they provide facility for Krishna's enjoyment and for all of those devotees who are serving Krishna. It's an unlimited area of, it's funny to say an unlimited area, because area seems to have some, the ending point. There's no ending point. It's ever expansive. Nonetheless, those three internal potencies are knowledge, and then the existence of the spiritual world, all the forms and variety there, which are meant for Krishna's pleasure, are manifest in Sandini. Samvit is the knowledge potency. And Hladini, which comes from Srimati Radharani, who's Krishna's counterpart, in order for Krishna to enjoy eternal pastimes in the spiritual world. Of course, Srimati Radharani in Goloka Vrindavan, which is the apex of the spiritual world, Goloka Namni Nijadamni Tale Datasya Devi Mahesha Harinam Suteshu Teshu Te Te Prabhava Nichaya Vihitaschayena Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. Goloka is described as the topmost of all spiritual planets. And then below, well, so actually it starts at Devi Dham. Devi Dham, start where we are now. Devi Dham is the abode of Devi. And as I mentioned, Shambhu. And then above that is the abode of Shambhu. And then above that is Haridham, or Vaikuntha, and above that is Goloka Vrindavan. Srimati Radharani is, as we know, the queen of Vrindavan, and the cynosure of Krishna's eyes and of all those in the topmost planet, Goloka. She expands herself into the queens at Dwarka, and then into the Lakshmis in the Vaikuntha planets, and then further as Durga in the material world. Janmadyasya yataha, everything's coming from Krishna, one divine source, and the Shaktis all emanate from Srimati Radharani, who is the pinnacle of perfection. And the pinnacle of perfection means that she's the topmost devotee of Krishna, as mentioned in the last three verses of the Upadeshamrita and elsewhere. So, in context, we can see that everything's interconnected. So what happens, and how is it that in this verse it's describing today, what is the entangling feature of this world? What is the topmost form of worship? Or I should say, that object, who is the topmost form of worship in the spiritual world? Srimati Radharani, Krishna's topmost devotee. In the material world, as we cross over from the spiritual world to the material world, we have what Rūpa Gosvāmī calls Hlada Tapatraya. The Sandini, Samvit, and Hladini potencies, the internal potencies of the Lord. Everyone okay so far? Yeah. Just keep going? Yeah. I'll stop soon. Okay. They become transferred into the three modes of material nature. And amidst the three modes of material nature, or controlled by the three modes of material nature, a living entity, prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate, is controlled by these three modes, and hlada-tapa-traya, Jiva Goswami calls it, they, rather than enjoy eternal bliss, knowledge, and facility that is there in the internal potency of the Lord, instead we get dukhalayam, a place of misery, which is odd because it's Krishna's original energy, but it gets perverted. And this is what's described in the Brahma Samhita, the transferring process. What is the perversion? It's described in the Srimad Bhagavatam, bhayam dvitiya abhinibesha tasyad ishad apetasya viparya yosmiti. There's a way in which a jiva, who is described as the third energy of the Lord, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his teachings to Sanatana Goswami has described how there's three major energies: the internal energy, the external energy, and then there's the tatastha, the jiva, who then has freedom to choose somewhat between the material and the spiritual world. And the perversion comes when there is a desire for dvitiya, or separation from the Lord, and apetasya, a way in which the jiva turns away from Krishna with a sense of independence. And this perverted desire is facilitated in the perverse or perverted energy of the material world, a fool's playground. And then in the material world, although we're spiritual souls, we take on, according to our association with the three modes of material nature, various forms. One person is thinking, I'm a cat. Another person is thinking, I'm a dog. Someone else thinks I'm a man. Someone else thinks I'm a woman. Someone thinks I'm a brahmana. Someone thinks I'm an outcast. But actually, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, a wise person, vidya vinaya sampane brahmane gavirhastani shuni chaiva shupakecha pundita samadarshina, sees that actually these are the workings of the material nature, providing a particular type of dress for each soul according to that soul's interaction with the three modes of material nature. And then we get in the material world this opposite effect, hlada-tapa-traya. What is the highest pleasure in the spiritual world? Worshipping Radha and Krishna, and what is called the adiras. There is this sex energy in the spiritual world. It's the adiras, and it's pure. But when it comes to the material world, it's the opposite. The highest pleasure is the pastimes of Radha and Krishna. Everyone's tuned in. Those who are pure souls have had the association of Vaishnavas whose hearts are attached to the pastimes of Radha and Krishna. They also develop a sense for what's going on in the spiritual world. Well, the main thing is the relationship between Radha and Krishna. In fact, the song we sing all day long, Hare Krishna, is about that relationship. But when it gets perverted in the material world, you get Bollywood, and you get boy meets girl. And these types of relationships are expounded upon, or they're laid out for us in great detail in the Srimad Bhagavatam. For instance, we get stories like Pururava and Urvashi. And if one reads this chapter, we can just see the mechanics of boy meets girl, and then the attachment that ensues, and then the disappointment that comes very soon afterwards for both of them. And we can also read the story of Narada Muni preaching to King Prachinabarhi and telling him the story of Puranjana, who's looking for a good place to hang out in the material world and finds Bharat-varsha and ends up in a park with birds chirping and boy meets girl again, and he meets a lovely maiden and starts talking to her and says, well, how about it? And then he says, by the way, where are you from? She says, I have no idea. I don't know where I came from. I don't know where I'm going. All I know is I'm here right now. And then the story continues, as all stories that start that way do, in a way of entanglement. So the Srimad Bhagavatam then gives us the psychological advantage of putting before us not the Bollywood ending. I don't know how Bollywood stories end, actually. I've never seen one. But I do know how most stories end, unless they're tragedies, is they live happily ever after. And I used to ask my parents when I was a kid, and they read us a story, and then they said the couple, lived happily ever after. I wanted to know how that worked, because it seemed to me there was an ending point. And the adiras, that extreme pleasure in the spiritual world, which is eternal and ever increasing, then when it comes to the material world becomes a source of entanglement. So the Srimad Bhagavatam then gives us, by step, an introduction into, first of all the psychological conditions that we suffer from here in the material world, which are all predicated on bhayam dvitiya abhinibhesha tasyad. There's a misunderstanding that I'm the material body, therefore I'm fearful and I think I'm a competitor of God, and I become absorbed in all the wrong things. And it leads us step by step through the 9 cantos to a platform from which, after understanding our eternal position as servitor of the Lord, then it enters into the pastimes, the lila of Krishna in the spiritual world. And therefore, in the Bhagavatam is mentioned yat-pāda-paṅkaja-palāśa-vilāsa-bhaktyā, karmāśayaṁ grathitam udgrathayanti santaḥ. Tadvanda rikta matayo yatayo pirudha shroto ganas tamarnam vajabhasudeva. Unless one is able to cross over from the attraction between man and woman in the material world, yoshit sangha, which means this mistake, thinking that I'm a man, I'm a woman, therefore let's get together and we'll enjoy. It dispels, does the Bhagavatam, that myth, but it doesn't leave us there, because lots of people do that. You listen to good country songs or blues. What was that? Baby took the caddy, left me the mule to ride. There are all kinds of songs of woe and weal that we came together, I lost everything, and so on. So the Bhagavatam then invites us to enter into the adiras. Yat-pāda-paṅkaja-palāśa-vilāsa-bhaktyā. In that there's vilas. When one's ear becomes tuned to the love story in the spiritual world between Kṛṣṇa and his devotees, and the heart becomes attracted, which is the result of the process of devotional service. As Rūpa Gosvāmī mentions, that by continuously hearing and chanting, then one starts to notice that there's another situation beyond the material world, that of the devotees of the Lord in the spiritual world, and one becomes attracted to those devotees and wants to follow in their footsteps. This is the progressive way in which one steps away from the attraction to the dangerous material world. It's the proverbial third rail, which you cannot touch without being electrocuted, and allows one then, yat-pāda-paṅkaja-palāśa-vilāsa-bhaktyā, through this process or cultivation of bhakti, one begins to experience vilas, or the pleasure of hearing Krishna's pastimes and the pastimes of his devotees in the spiritual world. Then karmāśayaṁ udgrathayanti santaḥ. The hard knot in the heart, which has me bound up in this conviction that if I just try a little harder, I can enjoy the material world. It didn't work the last 12 trillion times, but maybe one more go at it, I'll get that. Prabhupada says after hearing about Krishna, one loses one's long-cherished desire to dominate material nature. And then he says, Tadvanna rikta matayo, that if you're rikta matayo, if your mind's empty, if you don't have vilas, if you don't have the Srimad Bhagavatam, which has been given in the context of starting with the Srimad Bhagavad Gita and so forth, understanding the difference between matter and spirit, and then gradually coming to the point of attraction to the safe pastimes of Krishna in the spiritual world. Then Rikta Matayo Pirudha, the waves of material nature can still wash us away. So one should take to the process of transferring one's allegiance from the material world to the spiritual world in the association of devotees. As it's mentioned here, Yoshit Sangha, this, the forms of this material world are false. This is the fundamental philosophical point which is vital to imbibe and realize from the beginning. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita gives us categorical information of the difference between matter and spirit. If you miss that, you miss the boat. Nasato vitite bhavo, nabhavo vitite sata, uvayor api drishnuntas tvanayos tatvadarshati. One energy is categorically inferior, and the other energy is categorically and eternally superior. That's the first equation. If you miss that one, all the other calculations you make after that you get the wrong answer. And you end up with an F. Which means you fail. So, so anyway, I'll say more, but I'll take it in the context of a conversation. The Socratic method. Either ask questions or demand some further explanation of something in context. Yes? Hare Krishna.
Such a nice class. My question is, in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, oftentimes it seems like women and sex desire are used interchangeably. But nowadays, we have men and women who are learning this, right? And
men and women who are what?
Or studying Srimad Bhagavatam.
Yeah.
And I was thinking how Prabhupada said that all men, best case, they should remain single. And all women, they should remain married, or they should get married. And so my question is, how could it be that the association of women is bad for men, but then traditionally, for women, it's good to get married and have affection for your husband and serve your husband and stuff like that?
The $50 million question. Thanks for asking. This is where one has to advance from algebra to, what's after algebra? Trigonometry? Huh? Calculus? You go that fast? Okay. You have to advance to the next level, which is how to navigate the material world and accommodate these two understandings. One fallacy that people come up with, minus the subtle philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam of understanding how we live a dual existence here in the material world, is embodied in for instance, in the United States Constitution, everyone's created equal. We can't apply that on the material platform because there is no equality. All the forms, not only did they start unequal, but they morph constantly. So you really can't keep track. There's no way to get any clear data on that. And on the other side, the soul is eternally the same quality, the part and parcel of Krishna. And therefore there's this way in which the Srimad Bhagavatam talks about how, as we practice devotional service, we have some training wheels to make sure that we don't veer off the path and become consumed. Some people will say, well, if it's spiritual, you should just treat everyone equally and have no rules and regulations. It seems counterintuitive. Spirit means freedom, or spiritual means freedom to do whatever you wish. That was the great experiment that was tried and failed in the 1960s and the early 70s. If it feels good, do it, and intermingle as much as you like, and that's freedom. Prabhupada came and gave some relief by saying, spiritual life is predicated by, well, first chanting Hare Krishna, and that means yena tena prakarena mana Krishna naveshayat. First try to think of Krishna, and then, as we heard the other day, he told everybody who got initiated, after they got initiated, there's 4 regulative principles. And that would have seemed counterintuitive in that culture, and it still does nowadays. But it's the way in which one can act as a body in this world. We have a body, so you have to conduct yourself in such a way that you don't become entangled, and at the same time you have to pursue spiritual life. So there's a point at which, when one surrenders to Krishna, Dikshakali, Bhaktakari, Atmasam. Krishna says, Lord Chaitanya quotes this verse, and he talks about how when one fully surrenders to Krishna, he no longer has a material body. You have a sadhaka deha. It's not an ordinary material body. You're in a different category. You're considered differently. That's Queen Kunti says, sorry, I'm getting there. I'll tighten it up in a second. But Ahobata shwapa chato garyanya jiva grivartate namatubhyam te pusta pasteju huvusasna arya brahmana charnana granati yete. When you take to the process of devotional service, or actually the verse says, if you just chant Hare Krishna, or even a little bit, even once, there's a way in which you're in a different category. What to speak of those who have surrendered? Dikshakali Bhaktakari Tariyatmasam. Krishna says, I accept you in the same category as myself. And so those who have a material body, once they take on the designation as a servitor of Krishna, their association is so effective that they can make other people devotees. And whether one's a man or a woman, once one has taken on this designation as a servitor of Krishna, this idea of Yoshit Sangha, meaning that that person is a representative of the material energy, no longer applies. But at the same time, there's throughout the Bhagavatam the admonition that you still have to be careful, because we're in a probationary period, even as we practice devotional service. Balavan indriya gramo vidvam samapikarshati. What is it? 9th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam says there's a way in which matra swasra tuhitrava nibhavakta sino bhaved. Balavan indriya gramo vidvam samapikarshati. It means that you should be careful. Even if you think you're a great learned scholar, or if you think you're a liberated person, actually don't think that, because that's the beginning of making a downfall. He says, Vidvam samapikarshati, the attraction between the male and female form is so strong, one should be very careful, and therefore there's this etiquette that we have within our society to honor the idea that it's very dangerous, the material nature. We can relapse and become reattracted, and it's not that it hasn't happened before to those who are highly elevated in Krishna consciousness. One can fall down from one's position. So one has to be fully aware of the exalted position of anyone, man or woman, who takes to the process of devotional service, as is mentioned in the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. The great Vaishnavis are called Thakuranis. They're in the same position as all godly souls, and they can deliver others. At the same time, Bhagavatam says, follow the external process. In fact, there's more on this in the end of the 7th canto, in the description of Varnashrama. And there's a way in which Narada, teaching Vasudeva, says that even as you're a householder, you should not, even if you feel yourself highly, or even if you are highly elevated in spiritual consciousness, you shouldn't neglect your family. And you should maintain your outward sense of attachment to them, because we need emotional support and interaction and so forth. In the past, people have artificially tried to become liberated souls and neglected their familial duties and tried to act like grihastas, acting like a renounced sage, and then neglecting their offspring and their spouse, even emotionally, as if that was some kind of advanced level of Krishna consciousness, and that results in disaster. So what I'm getting to is there's a balance that has to be enacted, that as we move forward, we have to recognize that we're still in the material world, but we also have to understand the exalted position of those who are in devotional service. I'll edit that down later into 2 sentences and try to give it to you. Yes? 1, 2.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much for your association in the class today. I've always wondered about this. You mentioned that the 3 spiritual potencies in the spiritual world, when it gets kind of transferred to the material world as the 3 modes of material nature. And I wanted to know if there's a one-to-one correlation between those potencies and each mode, or do they all just collectively become transferred, and it's not like one is...
Yeah, there is. But I can't tell you right now what it is. Sorry. Oh, it's Pancharatna Prabhu.
It's interesting you referenced all men are created equal, or the declaration. And that statement, all men are created equal, it was the basis of a social system where women were not equal. Now, one could easily read this particular purport and construe the same thing, that men and women, that women are you could say the enemy, in respect of the way this purport reads. Men and attachment to women, men who are attached to women. There's nothing on the other side about women attached to men, and that whole dynamic. Is it that we should read, as in sometimes in some documents it said, well, whatever you say, that wherever you find the pronoun his, it means his or her. Wherever you see men, it means men or women. So should we read it like that, or how would you suggest we read this?
The semantics are not as important as the principle and the intention that's behind it. As Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as it's mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita, as sandarshanam vishayinam atayoshitam cha. There's a lament, hahanta hanta, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is, when he's asked to meet a king. Categorically, as a sannyasi in the varnashram system, he says, I don't want to meet the king. He's attached to material things. And therefore, it'll be detrimental. What's more, it'll be a disgrace to the sannyas order. Does he ever meet the king? Yeah. He makes all arrangements to meet him because he realizes he's a Vaishnava. And sandarshanam vishayinam, in the verse that's quoted by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, was a lament because of the sense of doom if one gives in to the material conception of life and just thinks, I can enjoy the material nature, and looks at it with that intention. That's the point. Sandarshanam means you're looking at it with a particular intention that that's for me, I can enjoy that. Vishayan means you're drinking this sense gratification, which is also visha, it's poison. And that's the lament he has is this is what kills the soul. It's the atmaha. And people don't know that because the material world, it looks like a good idea, doesn't it? Like it seemed like a good idea at the time, and then it just didn't work out after 60 billion trillion lifetimes. And then finally someone comes along and says, you just need a little adjustment here. And really that's what Krishna consciousness gives us, a categorical adjustment. For instance, Rūpa Gosvāmī says, Yuvatinam yata yuni yunam cha yuvatau yata mano biramate tadvan mano me ramatam twayi. He says, just as young boys are attracted to young girls are naturally attracted to young boys. Am I correct so far? And you need anecdotal evidence? On the youth tour, said one of us told us that I think Manoram said they went to the Grand Canyon. You ever been there? It's the most awesome sight. I mean, probably there's more awesome sights, but it's one of them. And the boys and girls got out of the bus and he said they didn't even notice it because they were talking to each other. How are you? And he said, Yavatinam yatayuni, there's a natural attraction. He said, let me transfer that. Yavatinam yatayuni yunam cha yupatayata mano biramate padman mano me ramatam twayi. The way there's a natural attraction between boys and girls in the material world, let my natural attraction be drawn to you. And so if one is able to understand the principle, then it becomes clear what's to be done by changing pronouns without getting that part, the fundamental part we talked about in the beginning, asato vidite bhavo. The material world's categorically bad. Doesn't matter if you're even a Brahmin in the material world. Vipradvishad gunayatara ravindanava padaravinda vimukachva pacham varishnam manyetat arpita mano janehi tarta pranam punati sakulam natut buddhi manaha. Prahlad Maharaj says, I don't think these Brahmins really have much going for them if they don't have Krishna consciousness. Even the highest position in the Varnashram, the Brahmana, he says, the dog eater's better when the dog eater knows that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and has devotion for him. And he can purify his whole family, whereas the so-called Brahmin, with all these so-called good qualities, and cannot purify even himself. So that's the principle. And that context has to be created in our whatever sangha we invite people into. And also we have to create context for people from the very beginning so they don't miss that part. It's a delicate operation. That's why we have all kinds of training, because we're walking a tightrope act. It's a complex world. Sometimes I think of it as like, those bombs? You just got to cut the right wires when you're dealing with people. If you just go snipping haphazardly, you're going to blow somebody up, including yourself. So in the details, the main thing is, or before the details, the main thing is to get the category correct. Pancharastra, not satisfied. Okay, yes, Prabhu. He'll take it up with me at prasadam.
So I guess two comments. One with religion, what Johnny was saying. Prabhupada said, I want all my male disciples to be brahmacharis.
I missed that part, yeah.
Well, she said to be, she didn't say brahmachari, she said it's an English translation, like single man or something, right? But brahmachari, he said also the grihastas could be grihasta brahmacharis if they follow the, as I said in the purport, the regulations, the strictures. And so therefore, they could still be, all his male disciples could be brahmacharis and all the female disciples could be married. And it's not just that women have to just take shelter and then it's kind of both. And for Pancharatna Prabhu's question, if we just go a few verses ahead, there's a verse, a woman therefore should consider her husband, her house, and children to be the arrangement of the external energy of the Lord for her death. Just as the sweet singing of the hunter is death for the deer. So it is giving both sides.
They're giving both sides, but they're both a materialistic vision, which is necessary as building a foundation. We should understand the danger of entanglement in the material world. And we should equally understand, or even more importantly, understand the status of one who has risen above the material conception of life, with the caveat that one, being a tatastha jiva, can slip back at any time and relapse into a materialistic conception of life, and therefore we're very careful as we move forward. And as far as marriage and grihasta, I mean, there are accommodations for everybody. Really, the main point, we have to stick with the main points. And the main point is that one must be in a natural condition of life so that one has sensory strength and vitality in order to pursue Krishna consciousness throughout one's entire life. And life situations change, and therefore it's a beautiful and very accommodating system. It's not a restrictive and oppressive Taliban-esque, where it's not meant to be applied in a Taliban-esque way. It's what it is a recognition that there are two categories of energy in this world. There's the spiritual and material. So Varnashrama gives us an opportunity to accommodate our sense of what we need. And we all have it with our birth. We're predisposed to act in certain ways. We have emotions that came from our last life. And therefore, we're given an opportunity to live in a natural condition of life. If one's natural condition of life, one feels vitality living as a grihasta, and most of, as Prabhupada points out, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates were grihastas, then do it. And if somebody's enlivened by being a brahmachari, then that's the right place. And these are all judged according to how much they facilitate one's devotional service. Because if you have varnashrama, but you don't have an increase, dharma, swanistita pumsam vishvaksena katasuya notpadiyed yadiratim shrama eva hi kevalam. You can emphasize varnashrama to the moon, but if you're not getting ruchi and developing Krishna consciousness from it, you might as well just toss it in the dustbin, because it's shrama. It's all useless labor and organization for becoming more materialistic. It's a tendency to take any kind of spiritual principle and then try to misapply it so that one can go on dominating the material world. Throughout religious history, there's ways in which those in a position of power then forget about the actual purpose of the religion, and they just try to apply the external features. We, on the other hand, have been given good examples of the way in which the main point is to become Krishna conscious, and it should also be done carefully and judiciously so that we don't become affected by the material world, infected again. In Calcutta, the brahmacharis were complaining about the women in the temple who had taken big roles and a morning walk. They voiced all their complaints. It's not a new story. There are many of these kinds of stories. And then when Prabhupada came back to the temple and the women greeted them at the door, Prabhupada said, but these women, these devotees, by their association you'll attain liberation and perfection. Prabhupada was not a proponent of misapplying the principles of varnashrama, and forgetting the main purpose of life. That's an interesting place to end. Any last statement? Okay, yes, Ramlai.
Well, yesterday we took devotees on a tour of Sri Prabhupada's places on the Upper West Side, and by popular demand, we're going to do another one today, which will concentrate on Prabhupada's activities down on Bowery. They'll include 94 Bowery, 100 Bowery, which was the artist in resident loft of Mukunda and Janaki, who Prabhupada went to appeal that I need help, I need to leave this place. 100 Center Street, which was the apartment of Carl Jurgens and his wife Eva, where Prabhupada had to stay for a week or 10 days before 26 Second Avenue was obtained, and perhaps some other things. So that will take place again at the end of Harinam, which will be in Union Square Park. 7 o'clock, we'll pack up and proceed. Hare Krishna.
Thanks for doing that, when we were in Calcutta for the ashras,
Spending more time there, as they're all the places where Prabhupada grew up, and also the place where he got on the Jaladuta, the place where he met his spiritual master. And it can be an overlooked dham, but we've been finding that those devotees who get a chance to go and hear about Prabhupada's life and see the places where he lived, then develop a special relationship with Prabhupada and then become enlivened. So the way you're doing this is very helpful. Thank you. With the speak of keeping the transcendental vibration going. Hare Krishna. Haribol. Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Shri Shri Panchatattva, Shri Shri Gauranitai, Shri Shri Radha Govinda, Shri Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra, if you so desire, please give us a taste for the Srimad Bhagavatam and the wherewithal to present it in such a way that people feel accommodated and encouraged in Krishna consciousness. Thank you for considering our request. Om Tat Sat. Everyone agrees with this prayer in whole or in part, please unmute and say Hare Krishna. Hare